Just moments ago, something moved through the palace world like a tremor, quiet, controlled, and far more dangerous than any political scandal. Not a speech, not a headline, a sealed document, delivered without ceremony, handed to Prince Harry with the kind of discretion that doesn't signal routine, it signals damage control. The envelope didn't arrive through official channels. There was no assistant's email, no scheduled briefing, no polite warning in advance. It began with a knock that didn't belong, a soft, deliberate tap at the door of the Sussex residence, a name the staff didn't recognize, credentials they couldn't dispute, and on those credentials, unmistakable, the royal crest. The courier didn't linger. He didn't explain. He didn't answer questions. He simply placed the file into Harry's hands as if he'd been instructed not to speak another word, then vanished as silently as he came. And the moment Harry looked down at what he was holding, the air in the room seemed to change. Across the surface of the file, stamped with cold finality, were the words, "Confidential for his eyes only." Harry didn't open it right away. He stood there for several long minutes, motionless, as if his body knew something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. His hands tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. Not fear, something worse, recognition, because he'd seen that seal before, years ago, in a private office at Balmoral, long before exile, long before interviews, long before lines were drawn and doors were closed. But what truly stopped him wasn't the crest. It was the signature in the top left corner. Not Charles, not William. Princess Anne. Harry walked inside and shut the door behind him like a man trying to keep the outside world from witnessing what he was about to become. Meghan was on the sofa, reviewing footage from a charity event, half focused, half smiling the way you do when you're trying to keep going in spite of everything. She looked up immediately, and the smile disappeared, because Harry's face had emptied of color. She asked what was wrong, once, then again. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the unopened file as if it were staring back at him. Meghan stood and crossed the room quickly, reaching for his arm, trying to anchor him, but he flinched. Not away from her. Away from the weight of what he knew he was about to uncover. Her concern sharpened into unease. "Harry, what is it?" she asked, voice rising, the dread building with every second of his silence. "Still nothing." Harry sat down. He broke the seal. He opened the file. And as he read, Meghan watched something happen to him in real time. The blood drained from his cheeks. His fingers dug into the pages like they were trying to hold reality in place. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if language itself had failed him. Meghan stepped closer, reaching for the document, but Harry pulled it away, eyes widening, jaw trembling. She demanded answers. She begged. She tried to catch his gaze. And then she saw it. Just one word before Harry turned the page. DNA. Her body reacted before her mind could. Her knees softened. Her breath shortened. A dizzying panic surged up, sharp and physical, as if her chest had suddenly been filled with ice. She reached for support, but nothing was close enough. And then she fell. The sound of her body hitting the floor cracked through the room like a gunshot. The world snapped into motion, Harry shouting, staff rushing in, urgent voices colliding. Someone called for medical assistance. Someone else demanded privacy. A royal medical advisor, still bound under layers of silence, was contacted. But none of them understood what was happening the way Harry did. This wasn't just a health scare. This was a detonation. As Meghan lay unconscious, Harry stared back at the file. There were more pages, more results, more implications, more ghosts. But even before he reached the end, one truth had already landed like a blade. Someone had broken the code. And someone inside that institution had decided the silence was no longer worth protecting. Before we go deeper into what this could mean, and why this single document shook them to the core, subscribe now, because the next part of this story is where everything changes. Because to understand why this file didn't just upset Meghan, but fractured her, you have to understand the kind of war that can exist behind palace walls. Not with armies, not with weapons, with bloodlines, with legacy, with what people are allowed to know about themselves and what they are never supposed to ask. The monarchy has always survived on a carefully built facade. Continuity, strength, tradition, and destiny. But beneath the grandeur, behind the velvet and the portraits, there's always been one dangerous variable they can never fully control: the truth. For decades, the palace has operated as if it were guarding a fragile myth. And according to long-standing rumors, there were people whose job was to manage public relations, but to manage something deeper: narrative integrity. Sanitize what needs sanitizing, seal what needs sealing, relocate what needs disappearing, make sure no rumor becomes evidence. From the moment Harry was born, the whispers never truly stopped. Tabloids treated it like entertainment, timelines, resemblance, speculation. But inside the palace, it wasn't entertainment. It was a threat. And threats aren't laughed off behind those walls. They're managed. Staff reassigned, conversations redirected, mentions of Diana's private doubts shut down with a look, doors closed mid-sentence. And the chilling part, the public would never see any of it. But if you believe those closest to the story, Diana left behind more than memories. She left behind writing, private entries, coded notes, fragments of confessions stored away where the world couldn't reach them. Not accusations, not explosive claims written in ink for headlines. Something subtler. Questions, warnings. One line, supposedly, stayed with anyone who read it: Harry deserves to know. And as the years passed, another suspicion began to grow, one that made everything darker: that William may have known more than he ever admitted. Courtiers recalled fleeting glances between father and son, abrupt changes in conversation whenever certain topics surfaced, late-night calls to advisors that never appeared in official logs. While Harry was pushed outward, managed, softened, redirected, William was pulled deeper into the inner rooms. The heir was being prepared. The spare was being contained. Then came the Queen's final years, an era insiders describe as reflection wrapped in strategic transition. And one detail, repeatedly rumored and never clarified: a private letter written not long before her death. The contents unknown, but one phrase reportedly included, like a riddle carved into stone: let no crown rest upon confusion. Some interpret it as succession, others interpret it as something far more personal. And years before this file ever reached Harry's hands, Meghan herself, according to reports, was warned. Not loudly, not directly, the kind of warning that arrives disguised as advice. During a late dinner in her early royal days, a senior figure allegedly told her, "Curiosity is dangerous. Don't dig too deep. Some things are protected for a reason." At the time, it might have sounded like protocol. Now it reads like prophecy. And yet, even with suspicion, even with whispered history, almost nobody expected the next move. Because the name on that file was Charles. It was William. It was Princess Anne. Anne has always been the monarchy's hard edge: stoic, blunt, intensely loyal, fiercely disciplined. Not a woman known for emotional outbursts or public rebellion, which is exactly why this lands the way it does. If she authorized that file, or ensured it reached Harry, it wasn't an accident. It was a decision. So why now? Why take a match to a system built on controlled fire? Those close to Anne describe a woman who believes in duty, but not at the cost of moral rot. Someone who has watched the family twist itself into knots, not just hiding things from the public, but hiding things from each other. And according to inner whispers, the tipping point came during the final weeks of Queen Elizabeth's life. A conversation behind Balmoral's closed doors, a vow, a quiet line spoken without drama. Truth will surface, no matter the cost. And the Queen, tired and near the end, offered no objection. Anne carried that vow forward, and when Charles took the throne, she reportedly noticed a pattern that disturbed her. More files restricted, more questions buried, more fear of what could resurface. Some accounts even claim she confronted Charles directly, and that the conversation ended with Charles shutting a folder and saying, "Not everything needs to see the light." Anne's reply, according to those rumors, was colder than anger. Some things must. And then the most explosive piece, still in the realm of allegation but repeated enough to haunt the story, that Anne may have pursued verification outside palace systems, a discreet meeting, a lab director, no official record, no advisors, no aides, just a question that had haunted the family for decades. And when the results came, silence, until a file appeared, bearing the royal crest, with her initials in the corner, and only one intended recipient. Harry. But here's what Anne may not have anticipated: Meghan. Because Meghan didn't collapse simply because of shock. Not really. She collapsed because she saw something in Harry's eyes that she could not withstand. The look of a man realizing his entire life had been curated. Not by love, by control. Meghan had survived press storms, social isolation, protocol pressure, betrayal from within. She had been attacked in headlines, reduced in narratives, and treated like an intruder in a world she never asked to invade. But none of that prepared her for Harry's silence. See, when he opened that file, he wasn't reacting like a man reading gossip. He was reacting like a man watching his past rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. When Meghan called his name once, twice, he didn't answer. And when she reached for the document, he flinched like the pages could burn. Her panic rose because she understood the subtext. It wasn't just about biology. It was about what the institution had done to him, and what it would do to anyone who threatened the illusion. As Meghan regained a flicker of consciousness, she reached for Harry's hand. And in your script, one haunting detail lands like a ghost walking into the room. She whispered one name: Diana. Soft, broken, almost inaudible. And then she faded again. Because Diana isn't just a person in this story. Diana is a symbol, truth suppressed, pain hidden. The public fed one version while another version bleeds behind the curtains. And if that DNA file, even hypothetically, suggested something the palace feared, Meghan's collapse becomes something else entirely. Not a physical incident, a psychological fracture, a realization that she walked into a dynasty that treats truth like contraband. And now she was paying for secrets that predated her by decades. Harry, still holding her hand, turned back to the file. And then he did something that changes the stakes completely. He opened the second envelope tucked inside. Between lab results and formal headers was something that didn't belong in a sterile document at all. A handwritten letter, faded with age, ink softened by time, addressed in a way that made Harry's breath stop. To my son. And whether literal or dramatized, this is where your script becomes a gut punch, because it isn't DNA that breaks him. It's his mother's voice. The handwriting was unmistakable, the intimacy stripped of public polish, and the date at the top, only weeks before her death, turns the page into a loaded object. My darling boy, it begins. I don't know when you'll read this, or if it will ever reach you, but I must tell you what others won't. From the first line, it reads like urgency, not nostalgia, not reflection. A warning. She writes about a family truth buried beneath perfect portraits, about sons shaped not by freedom, but by expectation, about a system that builds futures based on what a person represents, not who they are. And then the line that cuts deepest. One of you will inherit the crown, but both of you will inherit the silence. The letter reframes the entire story. It suggests Diana feared a day when bloodlines would become leverage, when truth would be decided by results rather than love, and when the institution would protect itself, even at the cost of its own children. Then one sentence arrives like lightning. You're stronger than the blood they fear. Underlined, emphasized, written like she needed him to remember it when everything fell apart. And the postscript, the final blow, scrawled as if written in a hurry. Don't let them bury your birthright. No explanation. No context. Just those words like a fuse. Harry breaks, not into rage, but into a grief so heavy it quiets the room, because this was the voice he'd been missing in every battle. This was the message he never received, and the implication is brutal. Someone made sure he didn't. The letter doesn't give him peace. It gives him purpose. It turns the file from revelation into weapon, because now it isn't just about what was hidden. It's about who was allowed to decide what he deserved to know. And that's when Harry makes the call that fractures royal brotherhood. He demands a private meeting with William. It takes 3 calls before William agrees. At first he dismisses it. Then he stops responding. Only when someone close to both of them intervenes does William finally consent to a meeting behind palace walls. Quiet, controlled, stripped of witnesses. No aides. No security theater. Just 2 brothers on opposite sides of a legacy they no longer share. Harry arrives first, file in hand, not as paperwork but as proof. William enters guarded, posture rigid, eyes cautious, as if he already knows what this is. Harry doesn't circle the target. Did you know? William doesn't answer right away. He stands still, then moves to the mantel and braces his hands against it like he's holding himself upright. When he finally speaks, it isn't denial. It's something worse. Some truths come at too high a price. Harry's breath catches, because that isn't surprise, that isn't confusion. That's confession. Harry slams the file onto the table. The pages shift. The crest flashes. Diana's handwriting appears like a ghost stepping into the room. You had this, Harry says, his voice cracking. William doesn't reach for the file. He looks at Harry like they've lived 2 different lives under the same roof. You were never supposed to see it, he says quietly. Then he hesitates, just long enough to show where the fear lives. And Meghan, she was never supposed to see it either. The room goes cold. The file sits between them like a loaded gun, and Harry understands the real betrayal. It's not only what the palace did. It's what his brother accepted. Harry steps back, eyes glassy, and William doesn't follow. No explanation, no apology, just a turn, a walkout, and a door closing like a verdict. In that moment, the crown isn't a symbol. It's a weight that crushes relationships until there's nothing left. And as the palace scrambles to contain what's unfolding, the story pivots again. Because the next person to step forward isn't a courtier or a handler or a source. It's Charles. When Charles summons Harry to Clarence's house, it isn't paternal concern, it's containment. By this point, word of Harry's confrontation with William has already reached the inner corridors. Panic spreads fast inside institutions that survive on appearance. Charles doesn't greet Harry with shock. Because in your script he already knew. With measured calm, he admits he's been aware of the DNA results for years. He frames it as something palace advisors kept buried. Legacy handlers, archivists, the machinery that protects the narrative at all costs. According to Charles, it was never meant for Harry's eyes, not because it was false, but because it was dangerous. Harry's silence is the loudest thing in the room. Because his father's admission confirms what he feared. This wasn't neglect. It was orchestrated silence. Then Charles offers the deal. Walk away quietly. Never speak of the file. No interviews, no documentaries, no truth campaign. Silence in exchange for preservation. Keep what remains of your public status, keep your titles, keep the illusion intact. But if Harry refuses, Charles warns the response will be swift: discreditation, leaks, reputation attacks, the removal of Sussex titles without warning. And then Charles brings up Meghan, referencing her condition, her fragility, implying that another public storm would break her and paint Harry as reckless. The message is clear: protect your wife by protecting the lie. And here your script adds a thriller detail. Harry comes prepared, a recording device, every veiled threat captured, not for revenge, but because he understands the palace doesn't just deny truth. It rewrites it. Harry stands, fists clenched. The deal sits between them like poison. The truth, Diana's voice, Meghan's suffering, his own silence, everything funnels into this moment. But before the agreement can be made or rejected, a new voice enters the story. Doria Ragland. For years, Doria remained quiet, dignified, steady, always just outside the storm. But seeing her daughter collapse, seeing Harry cornered, seeing threats sharpen into strategy, pushes her past the point of restraint. The hospital is quiet, too quiet. Meghan is stable but shaken, her spirit bruised in a way no IV can repair. Harry hasn't left her side. And then Doria arrives, without press, without performance, with the calm authority of someone who knows exactly what power looks like when it tries to disguise itself. She embraces Harry first, cups his face in her hands, and asks one question that cuts through everything. What did they do this time? And then she tells him what she's been holding. She says that in Meghan's early palace days, a senior aide approached her discreetly, wrapped the warning in courtesy, but left the meaning sharp. There may be questions about lineage. Don't push, just smile. At the time, Doria assumed it was about class, about race, about prejudice. Now she sees something darker. They were preparing for a day when bloodlines would become leverage. And then she says something that stops Harry cold. That Diana, directly or indirectly, tried to reach out years ago, not publicly, not formally, through a third party. A note passed along like contraband, not official, not signed, not dated, but maternal in tone. A warning that Meghan might face the same traps Diana did, and someone needed to be ready. Doria admits she kept it buried, thinking silence might keep her daughter safe. But Meghan is on a hospital bed now, broken by secrets she never asked to carry. And Doria finally draws the line. There's more, she tells Harry. Letters, files, people who were never allowed to speak. Harry asks what to do, shattered and furious, feeling powerless against a machine built to swallow people whole. Doria looks him in the eye and answers with quiet steel. This isn't about revenge, it's about liberation. Truth isn't just a weapon, she says, it's release. This isn't only about Diana or Meghan or Harry. It's about the next generation. About refusing to let children inherit silence as their birthright. That conversation lights a fire that titles can't smother, threats can't extinguish, silence can't contain. And now Harry and Meghan begin preparing the one move that could change royal history. A public statement, not just about the DNA file, about the palace's obsession with control, secrecy, and bloodlines, not a collapse but a rebellion. The decision doesn't come easily. For days, Harry sits alone in his study, pen in hand, Diana's letter in front of him like a compass. Meghan, recovering but resolute, stands beside him, not as a duchess, but as a woman refusing to let silence decide her family's future. They know the next step cannot be quiet. It has to echo. Harry writes a speech titled, "The Truth They Buried." No royal polish, no PR filter, raw, honest damning. He lays out the file, the suppression, the inheritance of silence, the institution's grip on identity, and at the center of it all, a son reunited with his mother's voice and finally ready to stop being managed. Their legal team warns them, Backlash, lawsuits, character assassination, a media firestorm that could burn everything in its path. But this time they don't flinch. For every smear, they have evidence. For every denial, they have receipts. Inside the palace, panic erupts. Communications teams draft vague statements. Aides whisper about emergency briefings. An insider leaks that the institution is prepared to respond with force. Because they know if Harry and Meghan go forward, they won't simply tell a story. They'll dismantle a legacy. A major media platform agrees to host the live interview. No edits, no restrictions. 2 microphones, 1 unflinching broadcast. As the date approaches, Buckingham Palace feels it like pressure in the walls, like a storm waiting to break. Then the moment arrives. Harry steps on stage holding the file in one hand and Diana's letter in the other. Meghan sits beside him, no longer shrinking, no longer silent. And as Harry begins to speak, the world holds its breath. He talks about lineage, about betrayal, about a family that fears truth more than scandal, about how a system built on destiny can still be built on deception. But when he reads Diana's words aloud, something shifts. A mother's voice pierces decades of silence. And when he reaches the postscript, "Don't let them bury your birthright," it lands louder than any royal decree ever could. When the interview ends, there are no fireworks, no theatrical walk-off, no staged grandeur. Just one image that refuses to fade. Meghan, tear-streaked but unbroken, holding the file to her chest. Standing tall. No longer inside the system. Now a force outside it. Because in the House of Windsor, it was never only about the crown. It was always about the blood beneath it. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, told with clarity, tension, and the details others skip, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.